It's just buffering. Hello, I'm teaching artist Alex Rowe with Professor Lieu. Welcome to our live stream today. Today we're going to be reviewing an illustration portfolio. Now, if you want to develop healthy habits as an artist, Art Prof has everything you need. We have critiques, tutorials, and professional development. So, Clara, why don't you tell us a little bit about the artist and their work that we're critiquing today?
Yeah, so this is an illustration portfolio by Julie Kitzes. I'm sorry, Julie, if I mispronounced your name. And I just want to tell you guys a little bit about Julie's background and also their work. And so Julie says that they grew up in a remote wooded area of Western Canada, and they are accustomed to living in the wilderness and developed a deep respect for animals and the environment. And Julie originally set out to study veterinary medicine, but then ultimately decided to pursue art seriously, and got a BFA in illustration in 2017. Julie says, I love to create work depicting animals as well as anatomy and botanicals, and work on pet portrait commissions. So Julie says that their short-term goal is to get more illustration work from publications. Long-term goal is trying to have enough steady work to support their family. And Julie says, I worry that a lot of my work doesn't look like the stuff I see getting published in books and magazines. I wonder if there's a place for the art I'm making, or if I need to alter course to match the industry. Julie also says, I worry I don't have a consistent style or direction, that my work hops around too much to lend confidence to art directors who might consider hiring me. Alex, why don't you just give people an overview of Julie's work, and then we can dig into some of the specifics in Julie's statement.
Overall, with Julie's work, it's such a strong illustration portfolio. And honestly, very quickly, the statement concludes with all of the right questions about it, where right now it is a little too diverse in the styles of art, but they're all exceptional. So as we're critiquing it, I'm really excited to go through of what things are being done really well, how to improve the ones there, and then overall, how to intentionally craft that next level of portfolio after deciding where you want to send your work out, because that does matter.
My feeling, Julie, looking at your portfolio is that you can do anything you want. Like the world is your oyster in terms of you having the skill set to be able to create a diverse range of images. And it really, at this point, it's a matter of making a choice, deciding where do I want to focus. And that can be very tricky for a lot of illustrators. There's so many areas of illustration. There's editorial, there's children's books, there's comics, there's cartoons. Where would you say Julie might belong, just looking at the work, Alex?
When I'm looking at this, and Clara, before the stream, I mentioned this idea that this is Julie's work in that first completed portfolio. So we're assuming this is exactly the kind of work Julie wants to be doing. And already there are so many good images of animal characters for a children's book market. And that is, despite being such a staple of children's book work, that's very hard to do well. And Julie's rocking that out of the park in the images that they're showing in that. However, the images also go in a editorial direction for some pieces, and then also in a more, let's call it that fine art world of illustration now that's starting to emerge, where illustration work is showing in galleries and work for sale. So I'm seeing that as well. And I think the spoiler answer is that all three are possible simultaneously, but just creating separate portfolios, I think, is going to be necessary.
That is really important to have a focus for your portfolio, because we have this stream where we interviewed Alex Kiesling, who has a very vibrant freelance illustration career. And he said that the situation with art directors, they want to know what they're going to get. They don't want to look at a portfolio and go, oh, I hope I get this style. They want to know I'm going to get that style. And that is somewhat against the artistic process, because the artistic process is about trying different things and experimenting. But in the illustration industry, that's not going to help you, actually. So, Alex, what do you think about finding your style? Do you have any tips for that?
I mean, Julie's already doing the right things with it in looking and being aware of what is being published. Like, it's a very real concern and even fear at sometimes of, oh, does my work fit into the zeitgeist of what's going on in the illustration world? Like, I'm so glad that that's part of your statement because it's a real question to look at. Um, and as you're exploring that, keep that ear to the ground of agencies and publishers that are publishing talent like yours. And remember those, keep a list of them, keep in contact with them, build that repertoire. Because, yeah, although it might seem like everybody is publishing the same thing, there's still spots that are a little bit different than what's going on.
Well, so an example that we were going to bring up is Jan Brett, who is a very successful children's book illustrator. And I think you guys can see if we look at Julie's work, The Two Squirrels, and we take a look at Jan Brett's work, they are somewhat along the same lines in that they're fairly rendered. There's a huge amount of detail, broad range of different types of textures. So actually, one thing you can do as an illustrator is you can look up other illustrators who have a somewhat similar style and say, okay, what publishing house do they work with? Because usually the publishers have a particular type of work that they tend to favor. So that's
Mhm.
definitely one way to do it. But getting back to the squirrel piece, Alex, what's your first take on this?
I love the characterization of the squirrels. I love the textures throughout. Getting comments from people saying they love the trees, they love the environment that they're creating. I think that as far as where it can be pushed further, is that sense of depth and space can be challenged a little bit more. Where right now, I think, take for example the mountain ridge. Since that dark purple, it seems to be coming forward in space versus the snowfield right in front of the squirrels, which doesn't seem to be too close to the viewers. I would tweak around and play with those. And yeah, Clara, like phenomenal reference of a living illustrator to work from, because that's exactly the kind of way to incorporate the realism of how these images can work with the whimsy of these charming little creatures like drinking hot chocolate in a snowstorm.
Well, we have this comment from Soitenly who says it looks like Jan Brett's work has really strong values. And actually, that's what I was going to say about Julie's piece is that I love the textures, especially the fur that's in the squirrels. I mean, it's
Hmm.
so tactile. And I love the fact that the snow is different because so many people, they just go, oh, it's snow, dot, 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 dot.
Yeah.
Julie has clearly taken the time to really think about every single spot. But my largest overall concern with the piece is the lack of value range. Like if we were to take this image, put it into Photoshop and make it black and white, you would not have a broad range of values. It'd be a pretty gray piece. So I would say just pick a couple spots to pump up the darkness. Probably not in the background because you want to have lower contrast for atmospheric perspective to push it back. But I'm craving some of those darkness in some of the areas. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think when you're looking at Jan Brett's work as a comparison, notice how the darkness is not just put in there to even just help the composition. It's there to also help the story. Like on that image with the two mice and the fox, the highest point of contrast is the two mice under the umbrella, and you have that black shape in between next to the mouse with the bright white shirt. And so that's exactly where your eye goes. So using that to kind of dictate the story. Because I think there is that hesitation with children's book, unfortunately encouraged a lot of the time, that value equals dark and scary sometimes. Like, no, like a value structure is a helpful way to establish hierarchy in an image.
Right. And I think what Jan Brett does here is she is telling us where to look. And I think looking at this, we're supposed to look at the squirrels, but that doesn't mean you can't nudge us into that
Mhm.
direction as well. I want to say briefly, though, I think the clouds need work. I feel that they're a little bit out of place stylistically. They remind me of those ancient Chinese paintings with like super ultra stylized curly clouds because everything else in the piece it's fairly representational looking. Like these squirrels
Mhm.
are not super stylized. They look more like real squirrels and they do some character design. And so these to me feel a little bit out of place. So I might just reconsider that for that piece. Okay, how about this one, Alex? Liam the Learned Lemur.
Well, first off, with that, all the L's in that, I have to say a great trick that I've seen a lot of illustrators use that I've met at like the children's book conferences and events is creating an alphabet book where there are more alphabet books in the world than we can shake a stick at, but it's a phenomenal way to build a portfolio, build your style, and showcase what your work would be like in a dummy book format. So it's a very easy way to build that portfolio without being overwhelmed by like, oh my goodness, what am I going to draw? So one, I would say take off with this one because it's having so many fun things with the lizard and the lemur in the library, and he's learning. Like this is A plus alphabet book. And I do, Clara, with what you were saying about the clouds in the last one, I like how this one isn't as jarring between that stylized versus realism. What do you think about that for this one? Because I like how the lemur is definitely realistic, but it's not too realistic.
I happen to like the style of the lemur more because the personality of the lemur seems to come through more. The squirrels are cute, but they don't seem to have a really particular personality to them. I mean, this guy's focused. He's got like a hardcore exam. He's taking like the medical boards tomorrow, and like his career depends on it. Like, I totally have a narrative, but I didn't really have a narrative for the squirrels in the same way. I like
Mhm.
that, but I will say, Alex, I think the background is amazing. I think those books on the shelf, the two lemurs that are passing it around, like I am just floored by this background. And we've been talking a lot about backgrounds, and I hear all the time people say, well, if we have a background, I think that that's going to distract. So therefore, I should have a blank one. This proves you wrong, you guys. This is amazing. Like, could you picture if this did not have that library?
Oh, it would be just so flat. There would be like no world to be want to drawn into. And I love the inclusion of the soft space for your eye to rest next to the bookshelf between the tree branches. The only thing about the background that's really bugging me is those big blocks of black in there, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the squirrel piece is the value needs to be used to express the hierarchy. And right now, you have those dark bars where my eyes kind of keep jumping back up there. So if you focus that value in what you're starting to do with the face of the black around the lemur's eyes and the white of the chest, that's perfect. My eye goes straight there, and then it jumps back to the bookshelf. So kind of using what you're doing well.
We have a question from Lisa who says, can't Julie just have the customer pick the style from a few offerings?
Mm.
That's a great question. So why can't Julie just give them the portfolio that we got and say, pick one, whatever you guys want? Do you think that would work, Alex?
I think it would work eventually because when I've seen that work and when it works for illustrators is when you have full portfolios of those different styles. And then you can submit your work of just like, hey, I'm Joe Schmo, the illustrator. And you have style A, style B, style C, and each one has 10 to 15 images. So, yeah, that is a lot of work, but that's how illustrators who work in different fields and different styles make it work for themselves. If you want to do editorial work and children's work and fine artwork, just make those three different tabs on the website with essentially three different portfolios. So yes, it is a lot of work, but that's what it would take to get that to happen.
Drawing Fandom says this piece almost has too much going on, no place to set the eyes. Normally, I would say that because there's a crazy amount of detail, but those eyes are so bright with that yellow, and you're just going right there. Sure, maybe you could push back a couple of things, but I think it's hard to look at this piece and not notice the lemur.
Yeah, I think when you're bringing up the eyes, I think that's something this one and the squirrel piece as well could use beyond just value is a little bit of like push with the color contrast. So the lemur one, it's doing better with some muted colors and some more vibrant colors, but they're all still kind of in that same range. And that could be a really good thing to explore, as well as the value of light and dark.
Also, a lot of people are noticing details that you and I have not talked about. Alex Jude
Ah!
says the empty space in the shelf is shaped like an L. And I believe somebody else listed Dishbon says light, lollipop, leprechaun, lipstick, lizard, so many L words.
Mm.
It's so cool. Yeah, so this is a great
Oh,
piece
well, let's put
because
it on the desk.
you get the initial impact of the lemur, but then the more time you spend with it, you start to realize that there's actually a lot more involved. And I think that that's a wonderful feature.
And
Okay,
more
how about
so.
this
Oh,
one, Alex? It's called The Perils of Pigeon Racing.
this one is a tough one because I think it's incredibly impressive technically, and I personally love it because pigeon. But it's the one that I don't really see a place for in the portfolio otherwise, if that makes sense. Where and the only I have no technical complaint with it other than just stylistically and in its presence, it doesn't seem to go one way or the other within the portfolio as it is. But what are your some thoughts on that?
I'm going to disagree and say that I do
Mm.
have some technical stuff. The bird is great. Again, gorgeous textures, but the track is really driving me bats because the space doesn't work at all. And the thing is, the pigeon is so specific. Like it's got this cast shadow. And so that tells me, okay, the light is coming from above. But then the green is just like colored in. And perspective wise, I don't know what perspective this would be. It's like, I feel like I'm above the pigeon, but that point of view wouldn't work if I'm above the pigeon. I don't know. Like, I just don't buy the track at all.
You know what I'm kind of seeing with it is, and why those aren't bothering me so much is because it almost looks very graphic in a kind of cool layout for it. Where actually, I think if this was done in a less photorealistic style for the pigeon, if it was done more graphically in the application of color, I think that could work really well of having just an abstracted shape for the track and the flags kind of placed there, and the green just being a flat color in the background. I think that could work a lot better than this.
Yeah, I think that if you work in a more stylized, flat manner, then we tend to not expect things to make sense the way they do in the real world with lighting and shading and stuff like that. But here, the pigeon is the cue. Like the pigeon establishes the expectation that, oh, yes, this does follow gravity and lighting. And so we expect everything else to do it. Like even the
Mhm.
flags have beautiful volume and shape to them. But then we get to the track and it's like, oh, something is not functioning here. Also, that's supposed to be a cast, right?
It does look like sushi.
I don't see sushi, but I don't
Oh,
think
I
I
see
saw a
a little
cast.
salmon roll. Definitely a salmon roll in there.
I guess if it was like wrapped in tissue or something. I just don't know that I believe that as being a cast.
Well, for this, Trent's hitting I think, pretty well on the head. I think a horizon would help this piece a lot. And now I'm imagining the whole piece with a one of those bad comments where it's like, "Oh, this would be great, just start over." But look up images of like s- Olympic track and crossing the finish line in that victory moment and have it a pigeon. Like and having just stealing the composition from those to elicit that response of having the stands in the background, the Olympic rings, the sky, having that full composition in there to then show the pigeon.
I mean, that almost makes me think, Alex, that the pigeon's gesture is not dramatic enough. Like, you know, in the Olympics, when like the guy loses or the female, whoever, they lose by like a third of a second and you miss the gold medal because of that. A third, it's like you look at the anguish on their
Yeah.
faces when they lose the race. Like this pigeon is just chilling. And so I wonder if maybe we just need more reference images to really start to put the story together in a more clear way.
Or interestingly, maybe in the case of the pigeon, let like less reference of the pigeon and more stylization like you did with the lemur. Where the lemur is a little more stylized and he has so much character as he's reading that book. Whereas this pigeon is simply like a pigeon.
Okay, let's take a look at this one. It's called Art Nouveau Cat. What's your take, Alex?
This is tough. This series of the Art Nouveau cats, these two, they're so technically well done. The application of the watercolor and colored pencil is incredible. The sense of values are awesome, but I think the only problem I have with it is that they're so Mucha. They're definitely the Mucha Art Deco vibe. And the problem with that with an illustration portfolio is that it's already exists and it's just there. I think that's why Art Deco isn't really seen in a publishing world right now because it's just Muko's one of those artists where it's like you nailed it. However, pieces like this I could see selling like hotcakes hanging up in a cool local cafe, which honestly, of the working illustrators I know, almost all of them try to have work hanging up in local cafes at the same time because that's just another source of income. So this is that one where, yeah, I think these are not quite a good fit to show to publishing houses, but an excellent fit to hang and display. But what do you think about that attitude of this work?
I think it's really hard to make Art Nouveau work, even with the pose as an Art Nouveau type of pose, and not have that become a big distraction. Because it's the first thing I thought about when I looked at this piece. And it bums me out a little bit because some of the technical parts of the way this piece is drawn are amazing. I mean, like this
Oh yeah.
mosaic pattern, the gradations of blue that are back there, and this seaweed just blows me away. Like they look so juicy and plump and trend. Like I just love this technique. But the thing is that format of the Art Nouveau look, it's really hard for people to look at that in an original way. They'll always be thinking Alphonse Mucha, Art Nouveau is really hard to get away from that. And so to me, it sort of feels like technique that if it was reformatted some other way would feel like a fresh original take. Right now, it doesn't feel that way though.
Mhm. Which, however, is despite it being so Mucha inspired, you learned so much by doing this and the value and the texture and the color, everyone is like blown away by it and it's amazing. And so even though this one might not be a good one for the portfolio at the end of the day, it's a terrific learning piece of what kind of style do you want to portray.
This is a really good observation from Angie, who says that cat is fabulous. I want it. I think, Alex, one of the reasons we like this cat is because it's so specific. What is this called? It's like a skinless cat, or I have no idea what the
Yeah, I
what the
can't
breed
remember.
is.
I like cats, but these I like they weird me out, but it's like that Bill Murray line in Ghostbusters 2, hairless cats, weird. But I know people who love them, and I think this is that uniqueness that I think I was missing a little bit in the squirrels, where for the squirrels, despite the beanies and the scarves, they were simply the identical squirrels. Whereas this cat has obviously so much character.
Yeah, Charisma says
Mm.
hairless Sphinx cat. Okay, now the reason I'm pointing this out is that I think, given that Julie said they had interest in being a vet and they've have this appreciation for wilderness and animals, I think the more specific you can get with the species of the animals, the more interesting it's going to be. Because this could have just been a cat. We would not have been as into this, I think, if it was just some
Oh, no.
generic cat. So I would just say, Julie, in terms of all your pieces, when you do have an animal like you do here as well, be specific. Look up species. I mean, sometimes when I look stuff up, I'm like, whoa, I didn't know there was this fish. Like, it's kind of really fun to do.
Mhm. Which is a perfect for this one, that is what a perfect dog for this image. Just absolutely perfect.
And it's nice because you really feel that the context of the dog matters. Like if you had another dog, like if you had a bulldog here, this story would not really make a lot of sense. So I think really spending the time to research that would be an important thing.
Although that
Now,
could be a
this,
way to take the. Oh, sorry, continue.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I could see a bulldog in a barber's chair, with the
I love
barbershop
that.
quartet behind him.
So this one I actually don't think is as well composed as the last one. I feel that the gesture of the animal in the back is a little bit stiff. I mean, this is again
Mhm.
where you have to do some research. Like I would go online and find pictures of hairdressers and see what type of movements they make. I don't know about you, Alex, but when I get my hair cut, like I love my hairdresser. He's always like doing all these cool movements, and it just seems so like formal and I don't know. I just don't believe that this is like a real pose of a hairdresser.
Yeah, it seems like it's the single stock photo for reference where it gets the pose but not the life behind it. And I think one of the reasons that the composition isn't as strong is because the last one was a very heavily inspired Mucha composition. So it was like, oh yeah, that's a composition from the greats. Like it certainly works. Whereas this one is kind of taking those concepts and pushing it into your own original voice a little bit more, which of course the risk there is that it's into uncharted territory. So yeah, spending a little more time tweaking that composition would definitely take this one further.
And also, this is a small thing, but I think it would help with cohesion. My feeling is the animal in the background feels too separate from the blue, and I want a little bit more cohesion. So I wonder if just a couple of little spots of red inside the border or inside the pattern, just so we don't feel that the red
Mm.
is so isolated to that one figure. I mean, I'm not saying make the whole background red. I'm just saying scatter the color a little bit more so it doesn't feel like it's all in one area.
Yeah. And we're seeing like a lot of people reference that these look like tarot cards for these, or kind of like a graphic novel look. And again, I would stress that these two, despite how technically well handled the colored pencil is, not quite the best for a children's book work. But I just want to reiterate again, that does not mean these are bad pieces, just bad pieces for a children's book portfolio. So having that intention of where you want your work to go from here.
Okay, so this piece is Swamp Witch, and it's done with
Mm.
marker and digital. What do you think? Very different than the other pieces we've seen.
Honestly, looking through the other pieces, this is my favorite one so far. And that's not because I just love Swamp Witch, I just love Bones. Like that's not because I love all those things and I'm afraid of hairless cats. I love it because the colors are so unique and vibrant and playing well together. The composition is not only successful, but also very unique. And the style is very new and fun. So while this one is my personal favorite, it does have that question of course, not good for a children's book. But where do you see this one, Clara?
I could see this one in editorial, especially,
Mhm.
in the New Yorker, they always have a fiction piece at the end, and
Oh,
usually
yeah.
they'll a little bit more surrealistic, and the other ones that are about current events tend to be very specific, but I could see something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing for these that kind of it's tough where in the young adult market, it's pretty much just book covers, period, which is hard and it's very narrow, but you have to kind of get creative at what would fit for young adult books. Also, like short stories in magazines, album covers, music posters, things like that. So, kind of thinking outside the box of where to go with your work. Of if you really like this style of work, thinking about, okay, what are all the possible venues that it could exist?
And I will say, I do like some of the details. Like, do you guys see how the purple flower on the left, a couple of the petals are a little bit ragged. Like that's such a
Mhm.
nice little character flaw in that flower, which I think is beautifully done. And then I love the skin tone of the person. It's weird, it's dreamy, and it's really nicely paired with the greens and the blues in the water, because actually the contrast in this one's not that high. It's fairly low contrast because a lot of the colors are similar in terms of value, but I think it's got a great sense of atmosphere, and that's really working beautifully. Let's see. Charisma says, I would
Mm.
like this as in a graphic novel or something like that. I think it would fit so well with this style. Yeah, unfortunately, the illustration industry, it really is about like fitting in. And it's like you have to find your crowd. Like, what is the crowd that's going to appreciate the stuff that you have? I know, Alex, you and other people you know have struggled with that. That it's like, sorry, you don't fit. It's not anything to do with the quality of your work, but being told, oh, you're not doing what's trendy right now.
That's definitely the biggest problem in editorial, where editorial illustration is not to disparage it, but it is like we want it quickly, this is for tomorrow, and that's just the nature of the beast. Like, oh, this event happened yesterday, we're publishing in 2 days, we need an illustration now. And so it has to be that kind of quick turnaround and establishing a readable, legible style.
Kate says, is that the moon in the upper corner? It's really drawing my eye, but I don't know if I like it or not. I don't feel that it's a problem, but I do think it could be better, because one thing that I think could be a problem is that it's so similar in color as the skull in the foreground. In fact, it actually has the same muted green for the shadows. And so maybe if you'd want to like tone down the contrast, it was more like a yellow ochre, something a little bit darker, that might be helpful. I don't think it's a major thing, but I think it would help.
Mhm. Yeah, in a way, I enjoy how they're kind of sandwiching and echoing each other. That's kind of fun, but yeah, like a little more toned down, make it a little bit more muted in the background. I think that would take it further.
Okay, let's look at this one, which is a book cover for Animal Farm, which, if you've never read it before, it's a book by George Orwell. And it's a very simple book. It doesn't take a long time to read, but it's this allegory about all these different things. Look into it. It's a great book. So, what do you think about the cover, Alex?
The cover, I enjoy the colors, how I like the muted warm colors and then that flash of like the violet red and the apple. Compositionally, it's so close to being really eye-catching composition, but not quite there. Everything still ends up about the same size and taking up the same space. And take like the hooves like cheering in the foreground, which I think is fantastic. That's such a good look, but they're just slightly tilted. And if it was like a more dramatic diagonal and then the pig was at a more dramatic angle, then that would start to flow better. Instead of now, it's just kind of like pig, windmill, animals.
Actually, I have not read Animal Farm in forever, so maybe somebody can correct me. But is the windmill part of the story? I can't remember.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah,
What happens
windmill's a
to the
big
windmill?
part. It's long story short, like the animals have to build a windmill to make their farm self-sustaining once they revolt against the humans. So a big course is like the struggle to get the windmill built and to actually create that farm.
Well, so the alpha says, I think
Mm.
the windmill needs to be smaller. Maybe that would help the piece. I think my issue with the windmill, if we go back, is that it's a really generic windmill. Like, so many windmills are out there. I mean, wouldn't it be interesting if it was a contemporary windmill? Because Animal Farm, I don't believe, is a story that has to be in 1793. I think it's whatever time period you want to interpret. And actually, they have these huge windmills about an hour from where I live. And I look at those and I'm like, how did they make those things? Like, I just cannot wrap my head around that. And so I think it's, again, that lack of specificity. And same thing with the pig. Like, this is such a generic pig, and there's so many different kinds of pigs out there. I would love for Julie to do the research on that. What do you think?
It's funny because this image of the pig's face, I really enjoy it actually. Like it's funny because yes, it is very much a generic pig. It's just generic pink pig. But that expression of that dull passive like overlord, it's pretty good.
Well, one thing I do like, it's very clear the pig is looking down at us. Like we are definitely
Mhm.
shorter and smaller and less significant. And so that relationship I think is very well established. I think it could be that you like the facial expression, but I want more specifics because I know how
Mm.
different pigs can be depending on the species. So I want to give a shout out to Katie for the super chat who says, "Hey
Thank you
guys,
so
super
much.
stoked to see another illustration focused live stream. My favorite kind." Well, thank you so much, Katie. And that brings up, by the way, if you guys did not know, we are running a winter raffle right now. And we have all kinds of cool prizes that you guys can win. But most importantly, we need your help to stay up and running because it's not cheap to run this platform. And we want to make sure that we are always 100% free. Okay, what about the color scheme, Alex?
The color scheme, like I said, I enjoy it, but I'd be curious to push it further. I think getting a little bit more. It's already teetering that direction, inspired by like propaganda posters, but kind of looking at some of those for color influence might be a good idea, since that hits so much with Animal Farm's like political themes.
I would also say think about how you can incorporate the text with the image more. I do feel that the text is a little slapped on, especially
Mm.
when you look at something like this. Like this is Ralph Steadman who illustrated Animal Farm in 1995 and whoa, his version is so intense and I love the I mean it's a very dark telling compared to what Julie is doing, but I think that in his cover if we go back you can see that the stylistic choices they have to do with the text. The text is not just stuck on. And I see that very often that people say, "Oh, I'm going to make the image," and go, "Oh, I got to add some text." And it's like, I think the text should be in the thumbnails. I think you should plan that in advance. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And that's like the a number one like surprise of establishing illustration work within a publishing field. It's like, oh, planning compositionally for the text. So often sometimes if you have an image for a book cover, either planning the text in it or leaving that blankness for the text, whichever one you and the publisher work well to decide.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell from this piece, Ralph Steadman didn't just random illustrate stuff. I mean, he clearly left that space at the top for the text. And so I do think if you want to work in publishing or children's books, you really got to think about text. It cannot be just a last minute thing that you slap on. Okay, so this one's called Chameleon Sleuth and it's ink on Bristol. What do you think, Alex?
This one is similar to the Animal Farm one in the sense where for Animal Farm, when you zoomed in on the pig's face, I loved that. And this one, I love all of these little details in there, especially the zooming of the eye through the magnifying glass. It's terrific. And that's such a cool attention to detail, not just in the pattern of the hat, but the specific animal itself. And I like all that so much that when I look at the problems I have with the composition, my easiest thought is like, just get rid of them. Just zoom in to just the best parts of this image and it works just as well.
Well, I mean, do you think we need the buildings at the top? Do you think we could live without that?
Yeah, not a bit. I think we can lose them.
Yeah, because actually, if I look at the top of the hat and up, I'm not really that interested in what's above the hat. Now, below the hat is where it gets really interesting, especially the texture is beautiful. I mean, I wish Julie, I could just show you off as the poster child, as the person that doesn't just fill things in. Because it's true, if you look at an iguana, not every scale is the same size or the same shape. And I love that
Mhm.
Julie took the time to do that. But I don't know that you have to necessarily get rid of the city, but if you keep it, I think you have to give it more of a role because it just feels like a backdrop to me right now. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think it's also one where maybe I'm biased just because of how we've been talking about the rest of the work and the shape of this composition. But it reads to me like a book cover in a way. And so it's something that maybe the inclusion of fun text could help to make the background and the whole image more exciting and give that upper layer a little bit more pop.
Well, this is a good suggestion from Nolan, who says just black for the background would do this image good. So that might actually be a good response to the heavy amount of detail in the foreground, because I actually do like the shape of the smoke. I think is very lyrical and beautiful, but maybe the city is actually overcomplicating the background. And maybe if it was something more simple, that would come across
Hmm.
better.
There are also a couple good tangents in there that are kind of messing it up a little bit, like how that curl of the smoke lines up just about perfectly with the dome of the building, and that just flattens that background. Whereas if that building, if it was a little bit broader behind it, that would solve that problem.
Well, here's a comment from C. Cantrell who says, okay, so the city is not specific enough then. If I'm correct, it's London, because isn't that the London Bridge in the background?
Yeah, I think actually the city is perfectly specific. I actually really appreciate how they're not just block towers, which I do every time I draw a city. Like,
Yeah, it's not a specificity thing. I think it's how it relates to the rest of the composition, because here's the problem. Like, you almost can do, quote, too well on one section. So because the chameleon is so well done, the city just doesn't look as good by comparison. And so it's like you have to balance out the level of quality between all of the pieces. So Alex, tell us about Harry Clark.
yes. Well, it's funny because I was just going to mention how he does this so well of balancing that hyper detail with just big areas of, you know what? No, let's make it black. Like he did a phenomenal illustration for this one, The Fall of the House of Usher. And look at how much of the composition is just plain black. It's amazing. And how so much detail can be put into it, but the composition is so strong that it doesn't need to be everywhere. I think that's the kind of vibe that is kind of being worked towards with the detective iguana.
Yeah, so to be more conscious about, maybe those flat black shapes actually have more of a place than I
Mhm.
thought, because I think a lot of people, the emphasis is on the detail and the line work. But like you said, this piece would fall apart without those black shapes. So pretty important. Okay, so this one is Coyote Blooms. What's your take, Alex?
This one is another one that is incredibly well done technically. And it's the kind of one where I don't see it in an editorial really. I don't see it in children's books. I do see it in a fine art illustration setting, and I also see it in merchandising. I see it in print. I see it on T-shirts. I see it in a sticker market. And again, those are those things where if you going back to the question you had in your artist statement, if you want to make illustration that full-time gig, it's all about those small multiple sources of income that add up to something that can support you. So in
Now
that
that's
realm, I think this is perfect. Mhm.
that said though, sorry, I have to play
Yeah.
devil's advocate a little bit. You can, but it's very easy to be spread very thin. And
Mhm.
because you're spread thin, you're not really maximizing your time towards one thing. And you're competing with people who are maximizing their time in one area. So it depends on who you are, what works for you. Some people love it. Some people like the variety and doing all these different things. Some people's a big distraction. So you just have to think about, okay, what's the best scenario for me? So this piece, I guess, first of all, it's beautifully done, but I have a lot of trouble not thinking about Georgia O'Keeffe. I mean, it's sort of hard to paint a cow skull and not be compared to
Mhm.
Georgia O'Keeffe, but that distracts me, and I have a hard time getting past that.
Yeah, Carolyn's Art Adventures brought up that point of, would you say Skull with Flowers is a cliche, or is this unique enough not to be? And yeah, that's that great question because cliche is that tough thing to find until the work is done, and it's like, ah, I see. Where I don't know, for me, it definitely hits that cliche, but I'm loving the specific detail and all the types of flowers, the different breeds of flowers coming out of the skull. That I'm having more fun with it than I would if it was just a skull and a rose, you know? Like it's going a little bit further than just that.
Oh, to me, the flowers are way more interesting with the skull. I mean, one of my favorite parts is actually, if I go back to this detail, do you see the flowers that are coming out of the inside of the skull? Like, I actually really
Mhm.
wish there was more of that, because on the left-hand side, you see these purple flowers that are coming out. But then if we go back to the full view, I think that's the only place where the flowers are not just behind the skull. Like, I really wish there was more physical interaction, like maybe if the skull was cracked somewhere, or even down here at the bottom,
Ooh.
I guess there's like one little stem coming out, but I just feel like it's a missed opportunity in terms of really weaving those two things together.
Or if it had some moss or vines growing around it and through it. Mm, that would be nice.
All right, so let's take a look at this piece, which is an illustration of these, what is this, koi fish? I can't remember.
Mhm. Looks like it, yeah. I I think it's a lot of fun. It's a little busy. It's kind of the problems we brought up before where an inconsistent value structure here and there is kind of making it hard to find an area to focus my eye on. But it's one of those where it's Clara, do you feel this way where it's not so much of a bother because it's showing a chaotic school of fish that in a Where's Waldo way, I almost don't mind that my eye has no focal point?
I think I could buy that more if the fish were all different sizes, because right now they're all
Mhm.
about the same size. And I feel like if there were like tiny ones in the distance and middle ones and maybe like a big one in the foreground, then I
Oh,
feel like maybe it would achieve the type of depth that I would want to convince me. Right now, they're all pretty similar. And for me, it gets a little bit repetitive after a while for that reason.
and then the big one in the foreground could have those lovely details that they're so good at applying, and then they could gradually fade away. Yeah, that would be perfect.
Well, what do you think about the pen work, Alex? Because this one, the pen is pretty visibly separate from the painting. Whereas, let's say, for example, this piece, it's watercolor ink and colored pencil, but you almost cannot tell where one
Yeah,
media begins and one ends. This one, the media is pretty deliberately separated. Do you have a preference between the two styles?
I do not. Well, by that I mean I think they're both being handled very well, but I think even in those 2 styles, even between these 2 images, there's such a broad gulf between what they're saying and the kind of world and work that they fit into. Where the black outline definitely has a much more concretely illustrative storytelling, even animation stint to it. Like it has images. It makes me this image particularly makes me think of Miyazaki's animations, and I think that overall, like in conclusion, as we're talking about this whole portfolio, is yeah, it is a little bit too vast. Like, almost every piece has different good and bad qualities, and that hard work in moving forward is to kind of isolate what exactly you would want it to do and move forward from.
I mean, for me, the pen work falls a little flat, but I wonder if maybe I'm just saying that because I've seen how detailed Julie can get in the other pieces. I just don't think that it really conveys the specificity of the fish. I mean, what's saving the piece right now is each fish is really a different color, a different pattern. That's
Mhm.
working beautifully. I just feel like maybe the potential behind what the pen could do is getting missed out on a little bit. I want to say thank you to Drawing Fandom for the super chat who says this artwork
Oh,
has good movement and repetition, but yeah, some depth would help. Overall, I think the fish artwork just needs to be pushed further in some way, but I like it. I guess I feel similarly that it's like it's a good piece, but it doesn't have that extra spice that I would like it to have that really pushes it over the edge. By the way, you guys, we do have other illustration portfolio critiques for you guys to check out. And if you would like to submit to be considered for a free portfolio critique, just go to artprof.org, click on this purple button. It will take you to this submission form. By the way, we do have an ArtProf share today. ArtProf share is where one of you guys creates an artwork in response to one or several of our tutorials. So today we are looking at some artworks by Victor Peralta del Riego, who says in their statement, "I'm an amateur. Their daughter was born 3 years ago, had a couple of hours free after work, decided to start painting." And Victor says, "Art Prof has helped me get better insights into the artist psychologies and thought processes." So for example, Victor says, "I love that Lauren said that oil pastels, that's the closest painting media to sculpture." So Victor is referencing that, and also our curriculum for self-taught artists, where we talked about creating master copies. We also have this Google Doc as a curriculum if you guys have not seen it. But moving on, what Victor says is, "I'm naturally good with sculpture, but in painting, I had to be very conscious about what I was doing. Being able to transfer my sculpture intuition to drawing is exactly what I feel is happening in my pieces." And so a lot of these are pieces that are studies of masters like John Singer Sargent, Rembrandt, and Lickping. So what do you think about these pieces, Alex? How did Victor do?
I'm so glad Victor mentioned the attitude of sculpture within these because it's coming off as so apparent of I am carving this drawing. They look very sculpture in their application. The I'm also really impressed by how the light and shadow is done with varied colors as well. It's not just, oh, light, better put in some white. Oh, shadow, time to pull out the black pastel. Like using the colors to shape that form is really coming along well.
I mean, I'll tell you, Alex, I look at this piece in the cheekbone on the left. I mean, that really looks like somebody like modeled it, the surface like clay. And so, Victor, I think keep going with those oil pastels because you can really make them almost like a relief sculpture. And it seems like that connection between the sculptural quality of the oil pastels really was a big breakthrough, because I do think 2D art can be a little bit mysterious sometimes, because when you think about it, it is sort of like an illusion. Like you make something 2D to make it feel 3D, when actually making a sculpture sort of makes more sense because it's like, it's 3D, it stays 3D, right? And yet sometimes sculpture can be tougher for people for those reasons. So if you guys want to get a shout out here on YouTube, go to our tutorials page. We have a purple button where you guys can submit your Art Prof share work if you want to be considered for a shout out. But if you want to just show us on Instagram, just tag us. You can also use hashtag ArtProfShare because we love showing what you guys are making. Art Prof has a podcast. It's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And in a few minutes, Alex and I will be hanging out in the Art Prof Discord. We will be in the post live streams channel. So if you guys want to chat more about oil pastels or koi fish, we are happy to talk to you guys. Subscribe to our channel so you can continue to develop and grow as an artist. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters. Everybody notice the fourth column?
It's so big.
We never had 4 columns before. This is very exciting. And as a reminder, you guys, we do have the winter raffle. It ends on Saturday night, Eastern Standard Time. I would love to have a 5th column for this Patreon supporters page so we can stay free and accessible to everybody. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.